The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the ballroom as camera flashes erupted like fireworks. Ilara Whitmore stood frozen at the podium, her champagne glass trembling slightly in her manicured hand. The reporter's question hung in the air like smoke from a dying cigarette. "Is it true you're dating a janitor?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Without thinking, her finger pointed toward the back of the room, where a figure in navy blue coveralls was quietly mopping the marble floor. "I would never date a janitor," she declared, her voice carrying further than intended. The man stopped mid-motion, his eyes meeting hers across the crowded room with an expression she would never forget. Ilara Whitmore had built her empire on precision. At 35, she commanded Whitmore timepieces with the same exacting standards her father had instilled in her before his sudden death 5 years ago. Every morning at 6 sharp, she arrived at the gleaming headquarters overlooking Manhattan's Diamond District. Her office walls displayed awards and photographs of her shaking hands with world leaders, each frame positioned at mathematically perfect angles. The company's legacy stretched back 4 generations, but the weight of carrying it forward rested solely on her shoulders. She had learned early that emotions were luxury items she couldn't afford. When her father collapsed in his workshop at 58, clutching his chest while examining a prototype movement, Ilara had been 29 and working in marketing. The board of directors had questioned whether a woman could lead the company. Competitors circled like vultures, sensing weakness. Employees whispered about selling to larger corporations. In response, Ilara had crystallized into something harder than the sapphire crystal protecting their watch faces. Her days followed rigid patterns. Board meetings where she spoke in measured tones about market penetration and profit margins. Client dinners where she smiled at precisely the right moments while discussing Swiss complications and limited editions. Charity galas where she wrote checks for causes she barely had time to understand. She lived in a penthouse apartment filled with museum-quality furniture that remained pristine because she was never home long enough to disturb it. Men approached her regularly, drawn by her success, her beauty, or her bank account. Investment bankers with practiced charm, politicians with calculated smiles, CEOs from other companies seeking strategic alliances through marriage. She dated some of them. Relationships that felt like business negotiations conducted over expensive wine. None had ever seen her cry. None had ever heard her laugh without calculation behind it. None had ever touched the part of her that remembered being 8 years old, sitting on her father's lap while he explained how tiny gears could measure the infinite mystery of time. Meanwhile, 38 floors below, Noah Blake was finishing his shift in a world Ilara never noticed. He moved through the building like a ghost, arriving after the executives had gone home to their suburban mansions and their second wives. His territory included the executive floors, the workshops, and the public showrooms where million-dollar timepieces sat behind bulletproof glass. Noah had not always been invisible. 12 years ago, he had been Noah Blake, master horologist, the youngest craftsman ever admitted to the American Watchmaking Institute. His hands could coax life from the most delicate mechanisms. His workshop in Brooklyn had been small but renowned among collectors who valued artistry over mass production. He had been married to Sarah, a music teacher with gentle eyes and a laugh that made their cramped apartment feel like a palace. Then came the fire. A short circuit in aging wiring had ignited the building at 2 in the morning. Noah had managed to save Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door, carrying the elderly woman down 3 flights of smoke-filled stairs. But he couldn't save his workshop, his tools, his reputation, or his marriage. Sarah had tried to stand by him through the lawsuits and the insurance investigations, but watching him become someone she didn't recognize had slowly broken her spirit. The divorce papers had arrived on the same day Luna took her first steps. Noah had signed them without contest, understanding that Sarah deserved better than the hollow man he had become. But he had fought for joint custody of Luna with everything he had left, which wasn't much. The legal fees had consumed his savings, The stress had consumed his health. Depression had consumed his soul. The janitorial job had been a lifeline thrown by a friend of a friend who remembered Noah from better days. Night shift paid a premium, and the work was honest. More importantly, it allowed him to spend afternoons with Luna when she came home from school. He would pick her up at 3:30, help her with homework at the kitchen table of their studio apartment, make dinner from whatever was on sale at the grocery store, and tuck her into bed with stories about brave princesses and kind dragons before leaving for work at 10 p.m. Luna was 8 now, with Sarah's gentle eyes and Noah's stubborn chin. She never complained about their circumstances, never asked why other children had bigger homes or newer clothes. She made friendship bracelets from scraps of yarn and left them on Noah's pillow with notes that said, "Best Daddy Ever," in her careful cursive handwriting. When Noah came home exhausted at dawn, she would already be awake, making him toast with peanut butter cut into heart shapes. The night of the charity gala, Noah had been working later than usual. A wine spill in the executive dining room had required deep cleaning, and he wanted to finish before the morning staff arrived. He had been focused on removing red stains from imported marble when the sound of his name being discussed made him look up. The aftermath of Ilara's public declaration spread through the building like ripples in still water. By morning, everyone knew. The security guards smirked when he passed. The day-shift cleaning crew avoided eye contact. The executive assistants who had previously ignored him now watched him with a mixture of pity and embarrassment that felt worse than contempt. But Noah said nothing. He had learned years ago that defending himself only made things worse. He simply continued his work, disappearing into the rhythm of routine that had kept him sane through darker times. Mop. Rinse. Repeat. Check the supply closets. Empty the trash cans. Polish the brass fixtures until they gleamed like mirrors reflecting a life he used to live. After the humiliation of the charity gala, Ilara tried to push the incident from her mind, but the memory clung to her like smoke. She found herself taking different routes through the building to avoid encountering the man she had so thoughtlessly humiliated. When board meetings ran late and she caught glimpses of navy coveralls in the hallway, she felt an unfamiliar sensation in her chest that she couldn't quite name. 3 days after the gala, she was leaving her office near midnight when she noticed something glinting on the marble floor near the elevators. Her father's pocket watch lay where it had fallen from her purse, its gold case scratched from the impact. She had carried it everywhere since his death, though it had stopped working years ago. The watch repair shop she had visited all said the same thing. The mechanism was too old, too damaged. Parts no longer existed. Ilara picked up the watch and held it to her ear out of habit, hearing only silence. The inscription on the back had worn smooth from years of her father's fingers tracing the words, "Time heals all wounds, M.W." Her grandfather had given it to her father on his wedding day. Her father had planned to give it to her future husband someday, but someday had become never when his heart stopped beating. She slipped the watch back into her purse and headed home to her sterile penthouse, where she poured herself a glass of wine. She wouldn't finish and stared out at the city lights until exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep. The next morning, the watch was ticking. Ilara stared at it in disbelief, holding it to her ear to confirm the steady rhythm she hadn't heard in 5 years. The crystal face was clear, the hands moving with perfect precision. She opened the case and found everything exactly as it should be, except for a tiny engraving on the inside cover that hadn't been there before. Still ticking. N. Her hands trembled as she set the watch on her desk. Someone had taken it, repaired it, and returned it without a word. Someone with extraordinary skill and access to her office. Someone whose initial was N. The security footage told the story. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in navy coveralls had knelt beside the elevators, carefully picking up something from the floor. At 5:43 a.m., the same figure had entered her office with a master key, placed something on her desk, and left as quietly as a shadow. Noah Blake, the man she had publicly declared she would never date, had spent hours of his own time fixing the one thing in her life that couldn't be bought or replaced. The watch her father had treasured, the last connection to a man who had taught her that precision and patience could capture eternity in a mechanism small enough to fit in your palm. Ilara called the head of security and requested Noah's personnel file. The sparse document revealed little. Hired 3 years ago. Excellent performance reviews. No disciplinary actions. Under emergency contacts, there was only one name. Luna Blake. Daughter. Age 8. That afternoon, she found herself studying the building's employee database, searching for more information about the man who had restored her father's most precious possession. The deeper she dug, the more questions arose. Why was someone capable of such delicate work pushing a mop? What had brought him to this building, to this life that seemed so far beneath his abilities? For the first time in years, Ilara found herself genuinely curious about another person's story. The sensation was unsettling and addictive, like the first sip of wine after months of sobriety. She caught herself looking toward the hallways during evening meetings, hoping to catch a glimpse of navy coveralls. When she worked late, she listened for the soft sounds of footsteps and the gentle swoosh of a mop against marble. The watch ticked steadily on her wrist, marking moments she had never noticed before. Each second felt different now, weighted with possibility and questions she didn't know how to ask. Ilara began working later, telling herself it was dedication to quarterly reports and strategic planning. But truthfully, she was hoping to encounter Noah Blake again, to see the man behind the careful gesture that had restored something she thought was lost forever. The opportunity came on a Thursday evening when she emerged from a conference call with Tokyo investors to find Noah polishing the brass handrails outside her office. He looked up when she approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." He straightened, setting down his cloth. "Ma'am?" She held up her wrist, showing him the watch. "Though I suppose it works better now than it ever did when it was truly mine." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The building hummed quietly around them, fluorescent lights casting stark shadows on polished surfaces. Noah's eyes were the color of slate before a storm, and she found herself noticing details she had missed during their brief, humiliating encounter at the gala. The way his work shirt was always perfectly clean despite the nature of his job. The careful precision of his movements. The fact that his hands, though calloused, moved with the grace of someone who had once worked with delicate things. "I'm sorry about taking it," he said finally. "I saw it fall and recognized the maker's mark. 1890 vintage Whitmore movement. One of your great-grandfather's pieces. I couldn't leave it broken." "How did you know what it was?" "I used to work with timepieces." The answer came carefully, like he was revealing a secret he rarely shared. "A long time ago." "What happened?" Noah glanced toward the elevator, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. But something in her tone must have convinced him she was asking out of genuine interest rather than idle curiosity. "Life happened," he said. "Sometimes things break, and you can't fix them. Sometimes you have to start over in a different direction." Ilara nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. She had built her entire existence around the fear of things breaking, of having to start over. But here was a man who had done exactly that and somehow survived. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the watch repair. "It means more to me than you could know." "Your father was a good man," Noah said quietly. "He didn't deserve to go so young." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You knew my father?" But Noah was already walking away, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Ilara stood frozen, watching him disappear around the corner, her father's watch ticking steadily against her wrist, like a heartbeat she had forgotten she possessed. That night, she sat in her office long after Noah's shift had ended, staring at old photographs of her father. In several pictures from industry events, she noticed a young man standing slightly behind him, listening intently as her father explained various mechanisms to potential clients. The young man had thick, dark hair and intense eyes that seemed familiar. She pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the photos more closely. There, barely visible on the young man's shirt, was a name tag. Noah Blake. Apprentice. The realization struck her like lightning. Noah hadn't just known her father, he had worked for him. He had been part of the Whitmore legacy before everything fell apart, before he became invisible. Over the following days, Elara found herself paying attention to Noah in ways she had never noticed anyone before. She observed how he interacted with other employees, always polite but maintaining careful distance. She watched him work, noting the methodical way he approached each task, the pride he took in details others would never notice. On Friday afternoon, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She left her office early and drove to PS 107, where, according to Noah's file, Luna Blake was a third-grade student. The school was a typical Manhattan elementary building, brick and concrete, surrounded by a small playground. At 3:30, children poured out of the doors like colorful confetti, running toward waiting parents and caregivers. Luna Blake was easy to spot. She had her father's dark hair and the same careful way of observing her surroundings before moving. But where Noah seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, Luna moved with the light step of someone who still believed in magic. She waited on the front steps, a pink backpack covered in star stickers at her feet, reading a book that looked far too advanced for a third grader. When Noah arrived, jogging slightly because he was a few minutes late, Luna's face transformed into pure sunshine. "Daddy." She launched herself into his arms with the complete trust of a child who had never doubted she was loved. "Sorry, sweetheart." The train was delayed. Noah hugged her tightly, and Elara saw something in his expression she had never witnessed in the corporate world. Unconditional love without agenda or calculation. "It's okay. I finished my math homework while I waited. Want to see?" Luna pulled out a worksheet covered in neat numbers and careful writing. "You're brilliant," Noah said, studying the paper as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "But you know what? I think this answer here might need another look." They sat on the steps together. Luna's head bent close to her father's as he gently guided her through the problem. Watching them, Elara felt something crack open in her chest, a longing so sharp it took her breath away. This was what she had been missing all these years while building her empire. This connection, this simplicity, this love that didn't need contracts or negotiations or strategic planning. It just existed, pure and uncomplicated, like the steady ticking of a well-made watch. As Noah and Luna walked hand in hand toward the subway station, Luna skipping slightly to match her father's longer stride, Elara realized she was crying. Not the calculated tears she had shed at her father's funeral, performed for the cameras and the board members who were watching for signs of weakness. These were real tears, salt water carrying years of buried longing. She sat in her expensive car, watching the ordinary miracle of a father and daughter who had found joy despite having lost everything else, and wondered if she had spent her entire adult life optimizing for the wrong variables. The following Monday, Elara did something unprecedented. She left a note on her assistant's desk, requesting that Noah Blake be asked to come to her office at his earliest convenience. The request went through proper channels, causing curious looks and whispered conversations throughout the building. When Noah appeared at her door that evening, still wearing his work uniform, Elara realized she had no idea how to begin the conversation she needed to have. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her desk. Noah remained standing. Is there a problem with my work, ma'am? Number no. Your work is exemplary. I wanted to talk to you about something else. She took a breath, steadying herself. I know you worked for my father. For a moment, Noah's carefully composed expression flickered, revealing surprise and something that might have been pain. Then the mask slipped back into place. That was a long time ago. Tell me about it. It wasn't a request. Noah glanced toward the door, clearly calculating escape routes. But something in Ilara's voice, perhaps the fact that she was asking rather than demanding, made him reconsider. I was 26, he said finally, fresh out of horological school, full of ideas about craftsmanship and artistry. Your father took a chance on a kid from Brooklyn who thought he could change the world one gear at a time. What did you do for him? Started in repair. Moved up to restoration of vintage pieces. Eventually, he let me work on some custom commissions. Noah's voice grew softer. Remembering, he was patient with me, even when I made mistakes. Said I had good hands and a better heart. Then what happened? Life happened. The words came out harder than Noah had intended. I left to start my own business. Got married. Had dreams of building something that would last. He paused, struggling with memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. The fire took everything. My workshop, my tools, my reputation. The insurance company fought the claim. Lawyers got involved. Your father tried to help. Offered me my old job back. But I was too proud. Too angry. Too broken. Ilara leaned forward, studying his face. He talked about you, you know. After you left, he said you were the most talented craftsman he'd ever trained. He was kind. My father wasn't kind. He was honest. The words carried weight, and Noah looked up to meet her eyes for the first time since entering the office. If he said you were talented, it was because you were. Talent doesn't pay rent or buy groceries for an 8-year-old girl. But it fixed my father's watch. They sat in silence for a moment, the steady ticking of various timepieces around the office, marking seconds that felt pregnant with possibility. Why are you asking me this? Noah said finally. Ilara stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Far below, people moved like ants along sidewalks, each carrying their own stories of triumph and failure, love and loss. Because I've spent 5 years thinking I knew everything about running this company, about carrying on my father's legacy. But I realize I don't know anything about the people who make it possible. I don't know their stories or their dreams or what they've lost along the way. She turned back to face him, and because you gave me back something I thought was gone forever, not just the watch, the memory of my father's voice, telling me that time heals all wounds. I had forgotten that some things are worth waiting for. Noah stood, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the conversation. I should get back to work. Should you? Or do you think there might be another way? Ma'am, I'm offering you a job, Mr. Blake. Not as a janitor, but as what you are. A master horologist, head of our restoration department. Full benefits, salary commensurate with your skills, and flexible hours, so you can still pick up Luna from school. Noah stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The board would never approve. I am the board. This is my company, and I make the decisions about who works here and in what capacity. Ilara moved closer, her voice gaining strength. The question is, are you ready to stop hiding from who you used to be? The question hung between them like a bridge. Noah wasn't sure he was ready to cross. For 3 years, he had found safety in invisibility, in work that required nothing more than showing up and following instructions. The thought of creating again, of risking failure and judgment, terrified him more than poverty ever had. But as he looked at Ilara Whitmore really looked at her, he saw something he recognized. The same fear he carried, hidden behind expensive clothes and corporate success instead of janitor's coveralls and careful silence. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." As Noah left her office, Alara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the calculated optimism she brought to board meetings and investor calls, but real hope, fragile and precious as a watch movement, ticking with the rhythm of second chances. But Alara's research into Noah's past had only scratched the surface. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't name, she spent the following week making phone calls and reviewing old files, piecing together the full story of what had happened to her father's most promising apprentice. The truth, when she finally uncovered it, was more complex and heartbreaking than she had imagined. Noah hadn't simply left to start his own business. He had been recruited by Meridian Watch Company, Whitmore's biggest competitor, with an offer that included a signing bonus large enough to pay for his wedding and a down payment on a small workshop. The move had been seen as a betrayal by some in the industry, though her father had publicly wished him well. But the fire that destroyed Noah's workshop hadn't been an accident. According to a police report Alara had to pull strings to access, investigators had found evidence of arson. The primary suspect had been Marcus Chen, a disgruntled former employee of Noah's who had been fired for drinking on the job. Chen had been in the building that night, allegedly retrieving personal belongings. The case had never gone to trial. Chen had died in the fire, overcome by smoke while trying to escape. But not before Noah had carried Mrs. Chen, Marcus's elderly mother who lived in the apartment upstairs, to safety. The woman had survived, but Noah had been injured burns on his hands and arms, smoke inhalation that had left him hospitalized for 2 weeks. During his recovery, the insurance company had begun their investigation. Someone had leaked information suggesting that Noah might have set the fire himself for the insurance money. The accusation was baseless. Noah's policy barely covered his equipment, let alone provided motive for arson. But the suggestion was enough to poison the well of public opinion. Orders were canceled. Clients demanded refunds. Other craftsmen, fearing guilt by association, distanced themselves from Noah. His marriage to Sarah, already strained by financial pressures, and his physical recovery, couldn't survive the social ostracism. The most damaging detail was buried in a file from the insurance company's private investigator. Marcus Chen had been secretly working for Meridian Watch Company, feeding them information about Noah's client list and techniques. The fire had been intended to destroy evidence of industrial espionage, not to harm anyone. But Noah had never known this. He had spent 12 years believing that his former employee had died, trying to rob him, carrying the guilt of a man's death alongside the loss of everything else he had valued. Alara sat in her office at 2 a.m, surrounded by documents and police reports, trying to process what she had learned. Her father had tried to help Noah after the fire, offering him work and financial support. But Noah had been too broken, too proud, and too consumed by guilt to accept charity from his former mentor. The final piece of the puzzle came from her father's personal files, stored in a safe she had never opened. Among his papers, she found a folder labeled NB Restoration Fund, containing $25,000 in cash, and a letter dated just 2 weeks before her father's death. If you're reading this, the letter began in her father's careful handwriting. It means I didn't get the chance to make things right with Noah Blake. The money in this envelope represents commissions he earned but never collected, plus interest, plus my own attempt to repay a debt I've carried for 5 years. Noah Blake was the finest craftsman I ever trained, and I failed him when he needed me most. I knew about Marcus Chen's arrangement with Meridian. I had proof of the industrial espionage, proof that would have cleared Noah's name and restored his reputation. But I kept quiet to protect a business relationship that seemed more important at the time than one young man's future. I've regretted that decision every day since. If something happens to me before I can make amends, I'm trusting you to find a way to give Noah back what he lost, not just the money, but his place in this industry and his belief in his own worth. The letter was signed and dated, witnessed by her father's attorney. Legal proof of Noah's innocence and her father's guilt, a guilt he had carried to his grave. Alara called in sick for the first time in 5 years and spent the day walking through Central Park, trying to understand how a single decision could ripple through so many lives. Her father, whom she had idolized, had been human, after all, capable of moral failure and petty selfishness. Noah, whom she had seen as a victim of circumstance, had been the target of a deliberate conspiracy. And she, in her ignorance and arrogance, had perpetuated the injustice by treating him as invisible. That evening, she waited in the lobby until Noah arrived for his shift. When he saw her, his expression immediately became guarded. "Miss Whitmore, has something happened? We need to talk." "Not in my office, somewhere private." "Please." They walked to a 24-hour diner 6 blocks away, sliding into a booth in the back corner where the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Alara had never been in a place like this, but it felt appropriate for the conversation they needed to have. She laid the documents on the table between them. Police reports, insurance files, her father's letter, and the envelope of money. "I know what really happened," she said simply. Noah's face went white as he recognized the official letterheads and saw his own name typed across multiple pages. His hands trembled as he picked up her father's letter, reading it slowly, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been relief. "He knew," Noah whispered.